Everybody. Hope that you're having a nice evening and hope we don't get too much snow, but we'll see what happens when it starts. I have a couple of announcements I want to share with you. Tomorrow at 12 noon, we're doing another podcast at Starting Point. And our podcast tomorrow is on gambling. Our gambling therapist, CP Mirachi, who's a real character, by the way, you'll enjoy him. Okay. He's a national certified gambling counselor, and he also has worked in the drug and alcohol field for a long. I've known CP for a long time. You know, he's a South Philadelphia character, so you'll enjoy him tomorrow. But he'll be on at 12 noon to do a podcast on making a bet, entertainment or addiction. So I really think try to check in on it if you can. If you can't, all of our podcasts are being recorded and they're being put on our new YouTube channel at Starting Point. And you can go to the website to get information about the YouTube channel. Okay, so basically we've been putting that together. And also the lectures that I'm doing here are also being put on a YouTube channel as well as on Vince's Corner. So we're trying to get as much out there as possible. And we're trying to do a podcast maybe every 2 weeks. So tomorrow, 12 o'clock is on gambling. I do want to mention also that everything else that we have that we're doing here at Starting Point, you can check it out on the website, startingpoint.org, or on our Facebook page. I do want to mention, though, if you're not a member of our Facebook page, feel free to friend us. We'll happily put you on. And also, if you want to be on the email mailing list, you can always stick your email in the chat, and we'll take care of that for you, too. Okay. One more thing. I can't forget this. Okay. We can't pass the basket. So the virtual basket is Venmo. And our Venmo number is at Starting Point, all one word, NJ. Starting Point NJ. It's real simple. It's also in the chat room too. Okay, that's all the commercials. Okay, I'm going to begin by doing a reading tonight. I'm doing excerpts of the reading from The Language of Letting Go. And it's the one from November 2nd. The grief process. To let ourselves wholly grieve our losses is how we surrender to the process of life and recovery. Some experts, like Patrick Carnes, call the 12 steps a program for dealing with our losses, a program for dealing with our grief. How do we grieve? Awkwardly, imperfectly, usually with a great deal of resistance, often with anger and attempts to negotiate, ultimately by surrendering to the pain. The grief process, says Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is a 5-stage process: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and finally acceptance. That's how we grieve. Although this 5-step process looks tidy on paper, it is not tidy in life. We do not move through it as if we're in a compartment. We usually flounder through it, kicking and screaming, with much back and forth movement, until we reach that peaceful state called acceptance. When we talk about unfinished business from our past, we're usually referring to losses about which we have not completed grieving. We can learn to understand the grief process and how it applies to recovery. Even good changes in recovery can bring loss and consequently grief. We can learn to help ourselves and others by understanding and becoming familiar with this process. We can learn to fully grieve our losses, feel our pain, accept and forgive, so we can feel joy and love. Today, God, help me open myself up to the process of grieving my losses. Allow me to allow myself to flow through the grief process according to the stages I may achieve peace and acceptance in my life. Please help me to be gentle with myself and others while we go through this very human process of healing. I really wanted to share that because I want to spend some time tonight talking about the whole concept of grief, but covering tonight from the first 3 stages. So I want to concentrate on denial, anger, and bargaining tonight. And next week, I'll spend the whole entire session on sadness and on acceptance. But the thing I want to try to bring out is something really important. Remember back in the beginning, I told that relation to that concept in the Bible, the story in the Bible about the farmer that planted some seed. And we talked about where the seed goes and how it's connected. And The first level that I'm planning to see is if I fell on some rock. And the rock I kind of equate to our head. See, most of us have what I call an Italian disease. It's called uncapatosa. In Italian, that means brickhead. It means that we have to do it the hard way first, put ourselves through a lot of insanity and craziness until finally we break loose and we come through. And you remember my father, because I worked for him, on the railroad when I was in college. I never worked for your dad, especially on the railroad. And we were laying track. And my father used to tell me a story. At the end of the summer, he would give me a rock as a gift. He said, put the rock on your desk, and every time you don't want to study or work on things in life, look at the rock. Remember what it takes to penetrate a rock. You got to take a ball-peen sledgehammer. You got to smack at it and smack at it and smack at it until it starts to crack, until it starts to open up and starts to get through. I use that analogy because the one thing we go through in the grieving process is a battle that all of us are involved in. It's the battle of the ego versus the spirit. Our ego is the part of us that constantly tries to figure everything out. That's why in those first three stages of grieving, they don't just happen like real nice in order. Those first three stages, we go back and forth. Sometimes they get all mixed up and put together. Because basically, these are things that we do for survival purposes. Because so many times in our life, we don't realize it, but we really aren't ready to look at certain things. And so as a result, then we have a tendency to have to basically take things in time. The hardest part about grieving is another word I was taught by my father. My father used to say to me all the time, un pazienza guaion, un pazienza guaion. In Italian, that means patient, my boy, patient, my little boy. I can never truly understand that, but I do now because the process of grieving is a slow and gradual process that takes time. It happens over a period of time. I remember two people that helped me tremendously in my eating disorder program, two of my younger sponsors back in the beginning, Richard and Marie. And they used to always say things to me. I told you about this before. They would say, if you learn that much today, you've made progress. Don't try to do too much. And this is a warning they give us in the grieving process because many of us try to figure this out. And believe me, you can figure it out. But we do that in the intellect. That's why there's a big difference between what I call intellectual recovery and what I call gut recovery, or I call getting into the spirit that's inside of us as a person. And that's why we have a tendency so many times because we're scared, because we're afraid. The biggest thing we're afraid of is fear of the unknown, not knowing where it's going to go. How am I going to be able to handle this? How will I be able to get through it? Not that I'm saying that, but basically my whole psychic, the whole part of me, has a tendency very many times to freeze up, to close up, because I don't know how to handle this situation. So sometimes the easiest way to do it is stay in denial, stay busy, stay active, stay involved in things, keep doing things, running around, isolating, hiding, do whatever you got to do. Not to have to look at it, not to have to feel it, not to have to get in touch with it. And that's the big piece about spirit, to get in touch with our feelings, to actually allow ourselves to feel. And that's scary. And that's one of the things we have a hard time with. And that's why denial is a protection we stay in for a long period of time. And I know from experience, you can stay in denial for a long period of time. It basically means I don't want to look at it. I don't want to deal with it. Therefore, I'm not. Yeah, I can deal with it intellectually. I can analyze it. I can try to figure it out. There's that negotiating stage again. I'm trying to find an answer to everything. Why is this happening to me? Why didn't it happen to somebody else? I hear addicts say this all the time. And say, how come I'm an addict? I can think of 10 people deserve it rather than me. These are negotiating pieces we do. And we're always negotiating. We're always trying to figure out a way. How can I get around this? Go back and forth with it. Because when we talk about grieving, we're not just talking about physical death. We're talking about the death of things emotionally in our life, relationships, changes in jobs, working to a new direction in life. Even now, we're in a pandemic, and basically we had to adjust to a whole new way of life, a whole new way of the unknown. And many people couldn't handle it. They can't deal with it. So they tried to make believe it wasn't there. And they literally went back to the old, and they tried back and forth to try to run away from it. You know, one thing about life, you can't run away from it. Eventually it will catch you. It's all part of the process we go through in life. You know, I said this so many times. When I die, I only want one thing on my tombstone: trust the process works. Life is a process. Everything in life is a process. Grieving is a process. It's a process we have to participate in every day of our life. It's what I refer to as the ultimate process of life. It's a process we have to constantly be a part of. It's something we are constantly experiencing in the course of our journey. And yet, so many times we fight it and we battle it. And that's why it's very easy to grieve intellectually. I can analyze it. Say, for example, you go to a funeral, people walk up to the casket, they look at the body and they say, God, doesn't he look good? He never looked that good when he was alive. Well, yeah, of course he looks good. He's been made up. But really, in reality, that's what I call a saying we do to avoid having to feel, be in touch with our feelings. Or we say things like, well, he's better off. You know, he's not suffering anymore. And that's to avoid having to look at that other powerful feeling, the feeling of anger. See, one of the hardest things for many of us is, how can I be angry at someone or something when in reality I actually love them? How can I be angry at them? It's easier to be angry at another person, but to be angry at someone you've lost, to be angry at someone you love. And yet anger is, I always say this, is one of the most beautiful, most powerful emotions on the face of this earth, if it's processed properly. And that's where we need to be able to process our feelings, get in touch with our feelings, be able to acknowledge them. We have to also realize the fact that your feelings are neither right nor wrong. They're just feelings. I know many of us, especially if you were raised in the 40s, you know, I know that not too many of you here connect to that. Charlie, maybe, I don't know, but go back in that direction. But back in the 40s, basically, you know, I was taught as a kid, never get angry. Anger's no good. But I find it really interesting. I had my aunts, and my aunts, you know, I refer to them as the generals. When they walk in the room, you saluted them. And basically, they used to come in the room and scream at me and yell at me and tell me, don't you ever get angry. I got 4 angry women telling me not to get angry. You know, they scared the hell out of me. I had nuns telling me not to get angry. Yet what do they do all day long? They yelled at me. And so the concept is, it's like these contradictions you grow up with in life, but they get planted in here. And as a result, we have a hard time feeling those feelings, getting in touch with those feelings. But I'm going to tell you, the most important thing to remember, feelings are neither right nor wrong. They're just feelings. You're allowed to have them. If you're human, you have a lot of feelings. I always tell the story. My mother was the addict in my family. She was on a lot of prescription drugs, especially her famous no-dose tablets or amphetamines. And basically, a couple of times driving across the Ben Franklin Bridge, I had this little feeling that went on inside of me. If I just open the car door and push her out, I just solved the addiction problem. But yeah, it's called a feeling. Now, if I open the door and push her out, I go to jail. But the bottom line is, to feel that feeling is normal. Many of us in this room, don't want to admit it, but sometimes you feel like you want to strangle someone. You feel like, if I can just get out of here. You get mad, we get angry, and then we feel guilty because we get mad and we get angry. And yet those feelings are normal. It's part of the grieving process. It's part of breaking denial. It's part of getting in touch with our feelings. And as a result, then it takes time for us to get to that point. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. There's a real process to it. That's why it's so important. And yes, we're always going to be in the process of negotiating. Let me give you an example of about negotiating. I always get a kick out of this. Do you ever get into a situation and you don't know how to get out of it? You say to God, God, if you get me out of this situation, it's called let's make a deal. To get me out of this situation, I make the following 150 promises. Then as soon as you get out of it, then you start what we call pre-bargaining. We say to God, well, you don't expect me to do 150 of them. How about if I just do 3? See, we're always negotiating. We're always kept back and forth because deep down inside, we make promises. We do this. We're scared. We're afraid. Look at my own life. You know, I knew intellectually 10 years before I left the priesthood, I wanted to leave. I wasn't happy. I was angry at everything. I was angry at institutions and stuff to that effect. I was in my rebel stage back then. And literally, I fought and I battled, but I was scared to make a decision. I was scared to actually feel my feelings and realize the fact that I was grieving something I needed to say goodbye to. But saying goodbye is hard, especially when you're used to it, especially when it's been a part of your life for a long period of time, and especially when it's all you knew. We see this a lot of times in addicts, or very many times because they've been in their addiction for such a long period of time, that addiction is normal to them. And so as a result, when they get into recovery, it's scary. It's the unknown. What do I do? How do I function in this world? It's much easier for me to go back to the old. You can't go back to the old. Like we said here, if the pandemic does get under control, are things going to go back the way they were before? Of course not. They're going to move to a new direction. Everything's always moving, it's always changing. And so we have to basically be able to work with it and go with the process to allow this stuff to begin to happen. And yet, I know what happens to many of us. You know, it's that battle we have between the intellect and the spirit. Your spirit is the part that makes us who we are. It's the part of us that makes us different. You know, I find this really when we talk about the process. The trees, nature, you know, plants, insects, all of God's creatures understand the process. The only ones who don't understand the process are human beings. That's because we got this thing up here. You know, I often say, when I die, I have to tell God something. I have to say, when you made me, you made a mistake. You should have put an off-on switch up here so I could shut the sucker off and break it. Because we think too much, we analyze too much, we try to figure it out. And that's where we have a hard time with things such as faith and trust and being able just to go with the flow of life where it takes you. And realize the fact that, yes, it will be different. And yes, I let go of and say goodbye to the way things were. Be open to where things can be. That's where Patrick Carnes, when he was talking about the 12 steps, comes into play. I really do believe this. I believe the 12 steps are a formula for grieving. They are a formula to help us to go through the process of life. The first 3 steps in the program are all about this process of denial, anger, and this process of negotiation. And so as a result, in the first 3 steps, you'll notice the steps are set up to help us go through a grieving process, because the first step, it means I need people in my life. I need people to share things with. I need people to be connected to. I can't do it by myself. I can't avoid it. I need to be able to be around other individuals and people who understand, who people that are going to help me through this process. But above all, to be around people I can share things with and they'll listen. But the first step says we admit it, we were powerless. Again, we're talking about the intellect. We admitted we were powerless. That's an intellectual gesture. We admitted we were powerless, that our lives had become unmanageable. We realized the fact that there's something happening in my life that I really can't control right now. It could be the loss of someone close to me. It could be the ending of a relationship. It could be a change in a lifestyle. It could be the family changing, things happening in different directions, maybe going through things in life where things aren't working anymore. So basically we experience this. We're experiencing different types of unmanageability. And yet, if we don't have a sense of faith and know that somehow, some way, we'll get through it. But this process I'm talking about in grieving takes time. It's a slow process. Change is a slow process. It's a gradual process. We have to get used to it. It's a process we go through. We got to be careful because fear can keep us from this process. Fear of being able to feel, be in touch with my feelings. Because your spirit will always be a part of you. It makes you the unique individual that you are. And your spirit is a part of you that allows your total humanness. I truly believe that we truly never die. Yeah, our body dies. Our body's only a casing. It grows old. Believe me, it does. And the concept is, it gets leaky after a while. You notice after a while things start to leak a little bit. That's why they sell those things called Depends and things of that effect. They're wonderful, aren't they? But the concept is we go through a leaking process, a changing process. And as a result, then all of a sudden you notice, wow, where do all these wrinkles come from? And we can have 82 pounds of anti-aging cream and we can put it all over us and do all this kind of stuff, but you're still going to get old. It's still going to change. There's a beginning, there's an ending. Even the Indians, I love reading Indian meditations because the elders were so much in touch with their spirit that when they were older and they were getting ready to leave the world, they knew when it was time. So the elders would go to the different people and say goodbye to them, and then go up to the mountainside and release their spirit, because they knew it was time to leave. It was time to move on. And that's one of the things in the grieving process we have to understand, that we got to go through this process patiently, and we're going to kick and we're going to scream and we're going to fight, because basically that second and third step is teaching me faith, teaching me to trust, to let go. I'm going to tell you right now, the hardest thing in life is to let go of the old, to move into the new, to be able to do closure, to be able to say goodbye. You've heard these phrases a lot of times. You have to learn to say goodbye before you can say hello. You have to be able to release something before you can have something new. But what do we do a lot of times? We try to get something new and blend it with the old. We get this mismatch going on all over the place. So we don't let go of the old. We try to do the new. We get confused. We get crazy. We get frustrated. We get angry, put ourselves through a lot of changes. And then basically we get a thing called agita. And agita means, I get upset and then I got to go buy a bottle of something to take the agita away. Pepto-Bismol or something to that effect. I don't know whatever that stuff is. But the bottom line is we have to learn that you can't. You got to let these things happen. That's why I love the second and third step, because it teaches us to let go, let the higher power or the higher presence in our life be a guide, and realize that in time, everything will find its way. Everything will work its way. But it will happen in God's time, not in our time. But we're human, so we try to make it happen in our time. We try to experience it. And there's a sadness involved in that too. That's why it's hard sometimes, to be able to face something and deal with something, because it hurts. I guess I'm beginning to realize something in life, that sometimes things have to hurt for growth to take place. They call them growing pains. Not that I expect to have too many more of them at this age, but I'll probably have a different kind of growing pain right now. It's called a growing old pain. But the concept is it's all part of the process we go through in life. And sometimes you got to kind of go with the flow, and you have to even laugh at life sometimes. It's all part of it. Just like when people die, they don't really die. Their spirit never dies. always tell the story, and I love telling this story. My neighbor down the street, Pat, you know, her husband was always a character. He was one of these Irish clowns, always telling stories, he was the life of the party, let's put it that way. And he was always had something to say. And so he had a couple of strokes, then he had a heart attack, and he ended up, on a ventilator. He was in a hospital, and he wasn't doing real good. And basically, finally, they came to the family and said to Pat, "I'm sorry, but he's pretty much brain dead. There's not much more we can do. We really should. It's up to the family to make a decision." So the family got together. I think she told me there was 6 or 7 of them got together around his bed, and they basically said some prayers. They brought a minister in to say some prayers along with them. And then they, told the doctor, okay, they took him off the ventilator, and he was laying there and going through the process of his body, going through the stages of dying. And then as they were praying, and he was supposedly gone, as they were praying, all of a sudden, his head popped up and he said, bye, and put his head back down again. And Pat was flabbergasted. She says, that sucker, he got the last word in again. The bottom line is, that wasn't his body talking. His body was only a casing. His spirit came back because his spirit needed to say goodbye to the family. And knowing him, he always got the last word in anyway, so he got it. But the bottom line is, you look at that and you realize, wow, and you can talk about different phenomena all over the place where things have come, they've touched. My wife can tell you a story of a man across the street where he said to her, there's somebody at the end of my bed who wants me to come with him. I wonder if I should go. And then finally, he did make a decision to go with the man. Now, was that an angel or was it? Who knows? The concept is your spirit is constantly in communication with the other side. We don't realize this a lot of times because we're too stuck in this world. And so the grieving process is teaching us over and over again the beautiful value of being able to allow ourselves to go through negotiation, to go through frustration, to go through anger, and go through denial. I'm going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I have a nickname. I call it running the gauntlet. We have to run the gauntlet until we get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Then we move on to the next part. But that's where faith and trust come into play. I have to somehow have faith, either in a higher power or a higher presence, to allow me to know that somehow, some way, I will be able to get through this. I'll be able to work through it. I don't know how, but with help, with guidance, with direction, with people around me. And that's why I've said before, you can't go through grieving alone and by yourself. You need to be connected with others. Now, like I mentioned before, sometimes we go through this even before somebody passes or before a change takes place. We're still going through this grieving process at different times in the course of our journey in life. And that's all part of the process. But I'll try to remember, even those who have gone before us, we have a concept that we can't understand why did this happen, especially if somebody young dies. Somebody dies of a drug overdose, or somebody dies suddenly, or we lose someone, they're not supposed to. Parents will say this all the time. I'm supposed to go before my children go. The loss of a child. These are things sometimes that we're going to, and sometimes even in anger towards God, and keep asking the question, why? Why did this happen? Why did it happen? And that's okay to feel that feeling, to feel that frustration, to feel that hurt, to feel that pain. But the scary thing is that sometimes you can get lost in denial, not wanting to look at it, not wanting to deal with it. And I've seen people become almost like zombies. They just go through the rituals of life and just get through life one day at a time. They function and they continue to function, but they never get in touch with the feelings because deep down inside, they're actually internally traumatized. And once your spirit is traumatized, it has a hard time breaking free. And that's why it's so important sometimes that we have to face the hurt. People that have been sexually abused, people that have gone through severe abuse problems, people that have gone through things, it's like they're grieving the loss of something very powerful in their life, the loss of their childhood, the loss of things that have happened to them. And sometimes it takes a while for them to be able to deal with this. I've seen people who've been severely sexually abused never deal with it or face it or be able to handle it until years and years later, because they kept that buried inside of them for a long period of time. But eventually it's got to come out. And I find it really interesting because I'm beginning to learn something. The more you stuff your feelings, the more you keep them inside, they will eventually catch up to you. And it's one of the things, like just to give you an example, this was done, that's got to be a good 4 years ago. It's a statistic that came out of Philadelphia Domestic Violence Court. And it just went like this. They said about 60 to 62% of the clients they get in domestic violence courts back then were people that were first-time offenders. And their MO very many times was that people that had stuff built up inside them for a long period of time, but eventually it came out on the wrong person, came out on the wrong child, it came out in the wrong place, and they got into trouble. You see this in DIFUS a lot of times too, when these things happen. And so as a result, it's almost like it came out. I didn't want it to come out, but it came out. And it didn't go, I didn't deal with it the way I was supposed to deal with it. And that's how we have things such as anger management programs and things of that effect that people get committed to a lot of times because they have to work through this stuff. If you don't work through it, it's almost like you stay stuffed and boxed in. You never do your growing and moving forward. And that's why the grieving process is important. It is the ultimate process of life. It's so important because it's almost like we have to go from that rock stage to denial stage. We have to go through that sandy soil stage a little bit at a time, and then sort out the weeds and thorns. It's almost like this is the process of life. And so whenever I talk about the grieving process, I always try to bring out the value of this process and why it's so important. But the one thing I really want to emphasize tonight is this is a gradual, slow process, a little bit at a time. Let it happen. Be open to it. Feel your feelings. Try to break through these levels the best you can. We are going to negotiate, and that's okay. It's all part of the process we go through. But hopefully we'll eventually come to that place of sadness. Next week when I talk about sadness and I talk about acceptance, sadness is something I can talk about. Acceptance, the spirit of acceptance, is something very difficult to really put into words. It's something you have to feel. But we come to sadness. Whenever I talk about sadness, I talk about the word death, because it's almost like experiencing a death of something in your life so something new can be born. It's part of the process we go through in life. And that's why it's important. So tonight, what I would like to do as we pray and celebrate, I want to be able to take a look at this process of grieving. As most of you know, at Starting Point, we have a memorial wall, a beautiful wall of people that have passed before us. It's a beautiful monument. It's a memorial. And I love it because it's so special and it's so beautiful. And so I'd like to remember all those that are on that wall and remember who they are as we say our prayers tonight. So let us pray. God, we come before you as a family. We come before you in prayer. We ask for your guidance. We ask for your direction in all that we do. Please be with us and help us as we go through this most beautiful, powerful process of life, the process of grieving. Teach us to realize that in time, we'll be able to work through everything in life. We have to realize the fact we need your help, we need your guidance, we need one another. We're grateful for those who have gone before us. Please allow us to continue their spirit to live inside of us. Remember, Lord, all those that are back on that wall at Starting Point, but above all, on the walls of our life. All those who have touched us at one time or another in our life, for they are part of our family. Teach us to look at things going on through the eyes of grieving, to grieve even the sadness of stuff that's happening in our life. And hopefully, eventually, we can learn something from it. But above all, teach us to realize that everything will happen in your time, not in my time. And so, God, we stay open to your will, we stay open to your way, we stay open to your guidance, we stay open to your direction. Help our spirit to be alive. Help our spirit to connect with others. Help our spirit to share the feelings going inside of us with others. For you are our guide and you are our strength. We ask that our higher power, our higher presence be with us no matter what we do and where we go. For you are our teacher, our guide. You are the one who leads us on our journey. We ask for your direction. We ask for your guidance today. And we pray for all those that are part of our journey. Help them through the grieving process too. We pray and we ask this in your name. Amen. Now I'm going to ask you guys, if you don't mind, unmuting yourself, and we'll close with the Serenity Prayer, the we version of the Serenity Prayer.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God's will, not mine, be done.